Okay, so work can be stressful, right? I mean, deadlines and coworkers and just like that feeling that you're drowning in to-dos. I think we can all relate to that feeling at least a little. But you know
Right.
what? You actually sent over some pretty interesting stuff about managing all that, like
Hmm.
managing stress and staying motivated, even like a whole case study about someone who totally like turned things around. So I think this deep dive is going to be pretty useful.
It is interesting, right? Like we always hear about stress.
Yeah.
But the thing is, workplace stress, it isn't just a feeling. It
Mm.
really does have like a physical and psychological impact on us.
Oh, yeah, totally. So it's not just like having a bad, right? It's like our bodies haven't quite caught up to the 21st century. But speaking of modern day stressors, the stuff you sent over highlights some real big ones. What were some that stood out to you?
Three things, actually. First, there's like the pressure cooker of deadlines and workload. You know what I
Right.
mean? Second is just the frustration of unclear expectations and like not getting enough feedback.
Hmm.
And then finally, there's just that energy drain of difficult relationships, like with colleagues or your manager.
Yeah, those are the big ones for sure. And I can definitely see how each one can trigger that whole fight or flight thing you were talking about. But here's the thing. The material also had some pretty simple techniques for managing them.
It does, yeah. And it's not about eliminating stress. It's about being able to deal with it. Like take deadlines. You can try using something called the Eisenhower matrix. It's great for prioritizing tasks. It's like a 4-quadrant grid. And you just place your tasks based on like how urgent and how important they are. So like the most urgent and important stuff goes in the first quadrant and so on. This way you can focus on what really needs to be done now and not feel overwhelmed by everything.
Okay, so it's kind of like a filter for your to-do list. That makes a lot of sense. But what about unclear expectations? That feeling of not knowing what your boss wants from you is definitely stressful.
Yeah, and that's where good communication comes in. Just don't be afraid to ask for clarification. If you're not sure what's expected of you, schedule a meeting with your manager. Just having these regular check-ins can prevent those stressful moments where you're like totally unsure what to do.
Yeah, it's like preventative maintenance for your work life. Okay, last but not least, how do we deal with those difficult relationships? Like, how do we navigate that without letting it get to us?
Well, setting boundaries is super important. It's not about being rude. It's about protecting your time and energy, you know, so that you can focus on your actual work. Like, say a coworker asks you to do another project. Instead of just saying yes because you feel obligated, you can politely decline. Maybe suggest alternatives like delegating to someone else or pushing back the deadline.
So having those sometimes tough conversations, but advocating for your own needs. Gotcha. I think that would make people feel a lot less overwhelmed. But let's be real, sometimes, even with the best strategies, stress gets the better of us. And that's where that whole stress spiral thing comes in,
We
right?
got it. When we're constantly stressed, our productivity just tanks. And our creativity, too, becomes this awful cycle. You're stressed, so you don't do well, which makes you even more stressed, and
Yeah.
so on. That's why it's so important to understand how stress actually affects our bodies.
Right, because we can't just tough it out. We have to recognize the impact it has on us. And I guess that's where techniques like the 90-20 rule come in.
Yeah, that's a really good one. It's a great way to combat mental fatigue. It's based on this idea that our brains can only focus for short periods. We're not meant to be on all the time. So the rule is basically work in focused 90-minute blocks, then take a 20-minute break. This way, your brain gets to rest and recharge, and you end up being more productive in the long run.
So it's like, we're not robots. We need those breaks to reset. Let's dig into those 20-minute breaks for a second. The stuff you sent mentioned a bunch of stress relief techniques. Are we talking about simple stuff like getting a coffee? Or is there something more strategic here?
Well, I mean, a coffee break's not bad, but the techniques that really work are the ones that target, like, the actual physical effects of stress. For example, deep breathing exercises can really help. They can regulate your heart rate and just calm down your whole nervous system. It's about consciously slowing down your breath and basically shifting your body out of that fight or flight mode.
So it's kind of like hacking your body's stress response. What about journaling? How does that fit in?
Journaling is a good way to process your thoughts and feelings. And I don't mean just venting. Actually, writing things down can help you identify patterns, like what triggers your stress. It can lead to a much deeper understanding of your own personal stress response. It's like having a conversation with yourself, but on paper. You might be surprised what comes up.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be helpful, especially if you're feeling like you're stuck in that stress spiral. It helps you take a step back and see things more clearly. But let's shift gears a bit. We've talked a lot about stress, but what about staying motivated?
Well, that's where your why comes in. When stress drains our energy, we lose sight of our goals. So
Hmm.
it's really important to reconnect with your purpose. Why are you doing this job in the first place? What are you hoping to achieve? Remembering that can really rekindle that motivation.
Yeah, it's like finding your North Star in all the chaos. But sometimes, even with the clear why, things just feel too big, like the whole project just seems impossible. So, how do we stay motivated when faced with those giant tasks?
That's where micro goals can really help. Instead of getting overwhelmed by the whole project, break it down into smaller steps. This way, you create momentum by achieving those small wins along the way.
It's like climbing a mountain, one step at a time. But I'm guessing celebrating those small wins is important too, right?
It is, absolutely. Celebrating your successes, even the little ones, just reinforces that positive behavior. And that keeps you motivated. It could be something as simple as like enjoying your favorite snack after you finish a difficult task, or even just sharing your accomplishment with a colleague. Just acknowledge your progress and let yourself feel good about it.
I like that. And you actually included a really interesting case study about this in the material. It's about this guy named Ravi. He was dealing with a ton of workplace stress. His story really hit home for me, and I think a lot of people will relate to it.
Yeah, Ravi's journey is a great example of how well these techniques can actually work. He was stuck in that cycle of stress, burning out, and starting to doubt himself. But by using some of these strategies we've talked about, he was able to turn things around.
Let's dive into Ravi's story a bit more. I'm really curious to see how he was able to make that change. So, before we got sidetracked, we were about to talk about Ravi's experience with all this workplace stress. It just seems like such a good example of how, these simple techniques can make a real difference.
Right, like Ravi was totally overwhelmed with his workload, and he was struggling to meet all these crazy deadlines. The guy was constantly working late, sacrificing his personal life, and he was even starting to doubt his own abilities. I think a lot of us have been there.
Yeah, it's like you're on a treadmill, going faster and faster, but not really getting anywhere. So, what changed for Ravi? How did he get off that treadmill?
Well, it started with him just acknowledging the problem. He realized that what he was doing wasn't sustainable. He was burning out. He knew he needed to change something. And the first thing he did was try those time management techniques we were talking about.
Oh, you mean like using the Eisenhower matrix to figure out his priorities and the 90-20 rule to structure his day?
Exactly. Those tools helped him get control of his schedule
Mm.
and focus on the important stuff instead of feeling overwhelmed by a million to-dos. But it wasn't just about managing time. It was about managing his mental and emotional state too.
So that's where the stress relief stuff came in.
Yep. Ravi started doing these deep breathing exercises every day. He said that even just taking a few minutes to focus on his breathing really helped him calm down and think more clearly.
It's kind of crazy how something so simple can be so effective.
It is. And he also started journaling regularly. That helped him process his emotions and figure out what his stress triggers actually were.
Hmm.
He was able to look at his stress from the outside and come up with ways to cope with it.
So it was like time management, stress relief, and self-reflection all working together. That's pretty cool.
It is, yeah. And by doing all that, Ravi was able to find a better balance. He got his focus back, his productivity shot up, and he actually started enjoying work again.
That's great to hear. It really shows that it is possible to break free from that stress cycle and take back control. But let's not forget about the motivation side of things. Even when we're managing our stress, it can be hard to stay motivated. That's where the stress and motivation planner comes in.
Right. That planner is designed to help you actually use all these strategies we've been talking about. It walks you through the whole process, like identifying your stressors, figuring out how to cope, and setting goals that'll actually motivate you.
So it's like a personalized roadmap to less stress and more motivation.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
And it starts by helping you figure out what your specific stress triggers are. What are the things at work that make you feel overwhelmed or anxious? Once you know what those are, then you can brainstorm ways to deal with them.
okay. So using those time management techniques and stress relief practices and setting boundaries, like we talked about,
Exactly. The planner just gives you a framework for choosing the strategies that work best for you. You know, it's about building your own personal stress management toolkit.
that makes sense. But it's not just about managing stress, is it? The planner also has a whole section on motivation, right?
It does, yeah. And it starts with setting goals. What do you want to achieve, both at work and in your personal life? You really need to have a clear picture of what you want in order to stay motivated.
Yeah, because if you don't know where you're going, it's hard to get excited about the journey, right?
Exactly. But sometimes, even with a clear vision, it can still feel overwhelming. Like, how do you even get started? So the planner encourages you to break those big goals down into smaller steps. That way you can feel a sense of progress as you achieve those little wins along the way.
Oh, so it's like making a step-by-step guide to reach that final destination. And I bet the planner also reminds you to celebrate those wins along the way, right?
Of course, celebrating your successes, even the small ones, is so important for staying motivated. And the planner encourages you to think about how you'll reward yourself when you reach those milestones. It could be something as simple as taking a break to do something you enjoy, or maybe treating yourself to something special.
Okay, so it's definitely not just a regular to-do list. It's really a guide to becoming less stressed and more motivated. It's about understanding your stress, choosing how to deal with it, setting clear goals, and celebrating your wins. What did you think was the most interesting part of the planner?
I think what's really cool is how much it emphasizes personalization. Like it recognizes that there's no one right way to manage stress or stay motivated. It's all about giving people the power to create a plan that works for them, based on their own unique situation.
I really like that. It's like acknowledging that we're all different, and what works for one person might not work for another. It's about taking control of your own well-being and making a plan that fits your life. But let's be real, putting any plan into action takes work. What advice would you give to someone who's feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this?
I'd say just start small. You don't have to change everything at once. Just pick one or two things that resonate with you and try incorporating them into your day. Maybe start with the 9 to 20 rule or try doing a 5-minute deep breathing exercise every morning. The important thing is to build momentum gradually.
So it's about progress, not perfection, and building on those small wins. Let's go back to Ravi for a second. It seems like his transformation wasn't just about following instructions. It was about changing his whole mindset, right?
Yeah, you're right. Ravi's success really came from a shift in perspective. He realized that taking care of himself wasn't selfish. It was actually crucial to his success. He learned to see stress management and self-care as investments, not indulgences.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself before you can take care of anything else. And Ravi's story is a great reminder that we can all make that change.
Absolutely. And while everyone's journey is different, the principles are the same. By understanding stress, using these techniques, and making self-care a priority, we can all find more balance and fulfillment at work.
So listeners, as we're wrapping up our look at the Stress and Motivation Planner, I'm curious to hear what you think. What technique or strategy really stood out to you? Is there something you're excited to try this week? Remember, we're all in this together, and even small steps can make a big difference.
And don't forget, self-care isn't a luxury, it's essential. By taking care of your mind, body, and spirit, you'll be much better equipped to handle the challenges of work and life.
Well said. So listeners, take a moment to reflect on what you've learned today. Think about one small step you can take this week to reduce your stress or find some extra motivation. Maybe it's a new time management technique or a deep breathing exercise, or even just scheduling some time for an activity you enjoy.
And as you're doing that, remember that it's a journey, not a destination. There will be bumps along the way. But the important thing is to keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep putting your well-being first.
Love that. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive completely, we want to leave you with one final thought. Something to think about as you navigate the ups and downs of work and life. Welcome back, everyone. So we've covered a lot in this deep dive. The impact of stress at work, different ways to manage it, and strategies for staying motivated. We even talked about Ravi's experience, which I found super inspiring. But before we finish up, we wanted to leave you with something to kind of think about.
A little food for thought.
Exactly. So we've talked about how common workplace stress is, right? But it still feels like people don't talk about it enough. Like it's this big secret or something. Why do you think that is? If it's so bad for us, why don't we talk about it more openly?
That's a really good question. And honestly, I don't think there's one easy answer.
Yeah.
Maybe it's part of our culture, this idea that we should just push through and ignore it.
Yeah.
Or maybe people are afraid to admit they're stressed, like they'll be seen as weak or something. Or maybe it's the workplace itself, like companies don't want to acknowledge how much stress is affecting their employees.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Because when we don't talk about it, it just makes the problem worse. People end up feeling alone, like they're the only ones struggling.
Exactly. And that's the opposite of what we need. We need to talk about it more openly, normalize those feelings, create a space where people feel safe being vulnerable.
It's like that saying, a problem shared is a problem halved. The more we talk about these things, the more we realize everyone's going through it. And hopefully that leads to more understanding, more support, and better solutions.
Yeah, I think that's key. It's about shifting the focus. Instead of putting all the pressure on individuals to be resilient, we need to create a culture where everyone takes responsibility. Workplaces need to prioritize well-being, not just productivity.
And on a personal level, we have to realize that taking care of ourselves isn't selfish. It's actually essential. Like putting on your own oxygen mask first before helping others.
Absolutely. And remember, managing stress and staying motivated is a journey. It's not a one-time thing. There will be times when you feel overwhelmed. That's just part of life. But the important thing is to have the tools and strategies ready, to know what your triggers are, and to have a good support system.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we hope you're leaving with a better understanding of stress and motivation at work. But more importantly, we hope you feel empowered. You have the tools, you have the knowledge, and you have the ability to create a work life that's both fulfilling and sustainable.
And don't forget, you're not alone in this. Reach out to your colleagues, your friends, your family, or even a professional. Build that support network that'll help you through the tough times.
That's great advice. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it helpful and interesting. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, a less stressed, more motivated you is totally within reach.